Hello folks, in this video I'm going to do phase 2 of the Tony Ray Tiger Moth build, and what I'm going to be aiming to do today is to get the tail feathers covered using dress lining. I'm used to that technique, I like using it, so let's get cracking. Favourite tipple in hand, let's get started. Here we go then. Whichever scheme I do decide to pick, it needs to be covered first, and then the question is with what. I'm certainly not going to cover it with plastic film, although that's a real light option. And if you're going for all yellow, then I would say why not. Civilian tiger moths tend to have a shiny finish anyway, but it just doesn't sit well with me, so I'm going to go for a cloth finish. I had contemplated actually biting the bullet and buying some Oratex and ironing it on, but I can't bring myself to do that. I've got used to using this covering, which is dress lining, Habuti C5882 is apparently the code for it. Now, there's a chap who's building a really big project, half-scale model, and he's decided to go with this technique. And he contacted me and said, look what's happening. So he ironed it on, nice tight finish, applied the dope, and then it all began to sag. And when he tried to reheat it, it sagged again. Now, I'm not sure why that's happening. The dope that he's using is fine, it's a shrinking dope. I can only put it down to the fabric. However, I have looked at something else, and that was somebody doing a full scale covering job, and they said if you get the heat too high, it causes sagging. So I've passed that on to him, and I'm wondering if that's the cause of the issues that he's had, if it isn't the actual covering. But I know that this works, so I'm going to stick with it. And I'm quite confident that if it's applied properly, it doesn't have to be excessively heavy. So when I'm starting on a covering job, I often begin with the tail feathers because they're nice and small to work with, and it gets your hand back into the process of covering, I think, no matter what material you're doing it with. So I'm going to cover these, and I'm going to prep them. And to prep them, I need to give them a coat of Mod Podge. So I'll pull these apart, get it Mod Podged up, and then we'll start the covering process along the way. And I'll hopefully point out a couple of tips for those of you who are thinking about using this technique, and one or two ideas that I have that I may not have shared and just overlooked sharing with you. So let's get cracking. Let's get creative, folks. So I've removed the hinges, and I'm going to give the airframe around the edges where I want it to stick a coat of Mod Podge. Now, sometimes I only give it one coat, and on other occasions I'll go with two coats. I think a lot depends on the quality of the balsa. If it's very absorbent, I might give it another coat. So I'm going all the way around the edges. There is no need to do the ribs themselves because we don't need them to stick to the ribs. If you do want them to stick to the ribs for extra strength, then why not? It's up to you, it's your model. But I'm going to just go around the edges. I'll actually put some Mod Podge on the solid balsa parts as well, but as I say, edges first. And then this can be allowed to dry. You can leave it for days, it doesn't make any difference because you're going to react it with the iron. I'll show you the settings that I have. Yeah, very interesting. I was watching somebody using a covering system for experimental aircraft full size, and he was going to a demonstration on the covering technique that he was going to use on his plane. And the chap that was talking about it made a point to say that if you go too high, it was just a passing comment he made, if you go too high with the temperature, the fabric loses its ability to shrink tight. So I'm wondering if, because a couple of people have mentioned this issue that they have had using this technique, and they have said that what they've experienced is it actually goes slack, and it doesn't matter what they do with the dope, they can't get it to tighten up, which of course is very disappointing for them and for me, because I'm advocating using this and I don't want people to waste time, energy and money on something that I've said works if it doesn't work for them. So we're trying to get to the bottom of it. At first I suspected that it was an issue with the type of polyester covering, but there didn't really seem to be any reason why one make would work more than the other, as long as it was 100% polyester. So I'm wondering if this is the reason. I'd like to have any feedback people have got on using it, but once I've finished doing this a little bit, I'll show you a wing that's been covered, so you don't think I'm just making this up, to demonstrate that it does work and produce a drum tight finish. So wait a minute, we've done this. I'll just prop it up like that. I'll bring a wing in. This is a wing for the Fokker D7. Two coats of dope. That's drum tight and there's no sag at all. Hopefully we'll get to the bottom of the issue that this chap's had, and we can share it with everybody, because I want this to work for people if you're going to try it. Anyway, back to Tony Ray's beautiful Tiger Moth design. One or two people have made a comment, or they've experienced issues with the cowling, which was pointed out by both Cliff and myself for different reasons. Cliff managed to break his cowling in the process of dropping it when he was applying. He was doing some paint work on it, I think, actually. I managed to break the cowling on mine, trying to pull it into shape, to pull it round the fuselage. And I know a chap made a reference on the Tony Ray's Facebook page that he was really disappointed with it because it was all broken in transit. It's a separate issue altogether, that, of course. I do understand that I think it's been 3D printed. It's a 3D printed plastic that by itself it's not strong enough. And I noticed that in the Junkmeister model that Tony's about to release, he works with a cowl that you then reinforce with fiberglass. Now, that's the approach I took anyway, because I'm using a nitro engine in my Tiger Moth, and PLA plastic and heat really don't go well together. I mean, I don't know if it's PLA, don't know enough about it, but I know that the heat from the heat guns used to shape it, so the heat from the engine would probably do the same thing, but not with the desired result. So that's just a little aside. I think Tony's aware of the issues and he's come up with a solution. So I'm going to carry on doing all of these surfaces, getting them ready, and then we'll talk about applying the covering. One coffee break later, 2 coats now on all of the surfaces along the edge. What I'm going to do is start the process of covering, demonstrated on this piece. It's more straightforward than the others. This is what I'm using, and I know I've mentioned it for those of you who are regular followers to the channel. I've mentioned it on numerous occasions, but I haven't actually mentioned the code for it because, quite frankly, I didn't know. A subscriber hunting down the covering, this dress lining, discovered the actual code for it and the name for it, and it's Habutai C5882. I'll put the link below. It's approximately 40 grams per square metre, a lot less than I thought initially. And I actually purchased it from a store in the UK called Boys. Now, I don't know whether it's that special. It's 100% polyester. But we're not quite sure why one of these chaps who's been using it's been having problems, whether it is the material or too high a temperature on the iron. I'll keep you informed on that as we do a little bit more research. I'm just roughly cutting it to size. Very generous overlap, and I'll explain why in a moment. But I'm just cutting some out. This happens to be, I know it'll probably not show up very well on the camera, but this is a cream colour. Comes in a variety of colours. This happens to be cream just because I thought I would get some. It doesn't really show up as very cream, to be honest with you, but there you go. I need to decide which side's the bottom. Don't think it makes any difference on this particular surface because you always do the underside first. Just going to double check. Okay, I'm going to go with, for what it's worth, I'm going to go with this side being the underside. Yeah, that's what I'm going with. So this side gets covered first. I'm going to place it on. And the rules for any covering is that you go length first, then width, and so on. However, because of the curve on this, I might have to break with that rule and iron it on here first of all, along this edge, and then pull it. And the trick with this covering, I find, is that you have to get it as tight as possible before you shrink it at all. Sorry, they were slightly out there. Now I'm going to pause this for a second, get the iron on, talk a little bit about the temperature as I use it, and then we'll get started. Back in a moment. Iron's up to temperature. I set this to medium. There's no digital thermostat on it. We just need it to be warm enough to reactivate the glue. So I'm going to tack it in the middle there, and then come to this end, put a little bit of tension on it and tack it here, and then do the same at this end, a little bit of tension on it, tack it there, and then I'll come across the centre. Now the excess gives you something to grip onto, and I was able to pull it and tack it. And I think the way it's going, I'll tack along the trailing edge and then pull it this way. Because if you pull it, if I bounce around too much, it'll pucker. And you can actually see the glue soaking through the fabric, which means it's going to have a really good grip. So I can pull this now, keep the tension on. I'm using the weight of the object, hanging it on this lower finger, putting a bit of tension on. And getting it taut without actually shrinking in any of it at all at this stage. It's not being shrunk. Just pulling it tight and working out. Pulling it tight working it out. And then I'll show you how we're going to deal with the excess in a second. Now there's a very slight pucker here. What I'll do is I'll apply heat here and pull on it and hold it for a second, and that pucker's gone. Okay, now another one I've just spotted here, and I've taken it out. I think that's an essential part of using this material. If you're aware of anything, any slackness at all, I'm putting the weight on and pulling on any puckering that's going on, or wrinkles rather. Taking them out. Right, I'm happy with that. Now, with all fabric coverings, you can get this sort of feathering as you pull on the edges. So a little trick is to take some of your Mod Podge and thin it down approximately 50-50 with some water, and then I'm going to brush that along here, along the edge, and let it dry. And then when I use either the scissors or a blade to cut through it, it won't fray. So I'll do that now, and then we'll get ready for overlapping the covering. Got a watered down coat of the Mod Podge. Just got to wet that through. And then it's a case of leaving it to dry. Won't take long. PVA glue would work just as well. I've done this when I've been working with silk. I find it works very well. So I'll paint this round, leave it to dry, and then we'll be able to cut it off or trim it without leaving any fray or suffering any fraying effects, which obviously are to be avoided. Let that dry, pop back in a moment. The thin down Mod Podge is now dried, and what you end up with is a slightly stiffened fabric. And I'm going to put a brand new blade in, which is always a good tactic when you're cutting any cloth, and trim it up to the size that we're looking for. Work out which way to put this on. There you go, new blade, and we'll get a clean cut here that won't fray in the same way that it would have done if I hadn't applied that thin down Mod Podge. Just enough to overlap now. Okay, I'll demonstrate the overlapping process now. So, simply applying the heat. Now the iron will probably need cleaning after this, because the glue, of course, will go onto the iron a little bit because it's impregnated into the cloth. Just going to trim this off a little more. No, actually I'll wait until I've covered it over and then I'll trim it afterwards. we have it. And then the same procedure to trim the front. In this case, I'm going to use these pinking shears and cut it fairly close to the edge. And these pinking shears will be used later on when it comes to applying the rib stitching tape. They may not use these ones. You can actually buy them in different scale tooth arrangements. These happen to be quarter scale, so it's obviously too big for this particular build, but it's fine for just the application of the covering. And they're not excessively expensive. I didn't believe it. I know cost is always a relative thing, and I don't want to tell people that you've got to get this because it's cheap. It might be cheap to me, it might not be to you, and vice versa. There you go. Now, this fabric is quite flexible in the sense that it'll go around these sort of curves quite easily, which is great. And as I say, I am very confident in using this technique to cover models now. The more you do something, the better you seem to get at it. So that's why I'm sticking with it. I'm happy with the results. And that's why I use them. And I don't think that it's much more difficult than using Oratex. And I'm convinced now, the more I've used it, that it's quite favourable in terms of weight, especially now that the subscribers pointed out that I was almost 100% overestimating the weight. And this stuff is actually 40 grams per square metre, which is very good. Obviously without any dope applied or paint, but even so. There you go. First layer done. I'll do the other side. And I think we'll do this to completion, including the doping, so you can see how it goes. I'm beginning to really think that the issues that one of the subscribers, or a couple of people have mentioned, is overheating of the polyester fabric, and that denatures the thermal properties of it, so it doesn't work properly. I think, I don't know. It's only through experimentation we find out. Anyway, that's one side covered. Let's cover the other side. Before you go to covering the next side, one of the things I do is apply dope, some thin down dope over the seal, the edge, and once that's dried, I'll reapply some Mod Podge, although you can reactivate the dope using heat as well. But I like to do this. I know it's an extra step and it's perhaps unnecessary, but I don't want the covering moving now. I want to firmly bond it to the wood, and the application of dope, I think, helps this. And it also produces, I think, a nice seamed finish and a neat finish. So apply around the edge, only. And you can see it going through the fabric and filling the pores. And then we'll measure out the next piece of fabric to cover the upper surface. This is where we're after producing a nice neat finish. So let's place that on there to dry. Just applying around the wood parts. There you go. Let that dry, and then we'll cut out the upper surface ready to cover it. Here's the tail horizontal stab. All doped on, sealed, because we don't want it to move now. And I'm just going to run the iron over to tighten it up. I don't really need to resort to a heat gun to do that. And perhaps this is the trick, not to use excessive heat on it. That's gone nice and taut on that side. This side there are a few more creases, but they'll come out, I'm confident of that. It's just floating the same iron temperature that I've used to apply the covering. I'm using to shrink the covering. There you go. All done, dusted, ready for the application of the dope, which I'll show you in a moment. There we go. It's time to apply some thin down dope. And the trick, for me anyway, is to use a sponge and to apply it in an inverted manner. It seems to make a big difference. And I've got a second sponge to hand to take off any excess. So it's a quick application. Shrinking dope, thin down to a watery consistency. Could probably be thinned even more than this, I think. In fact, I will after I've done this side. It's not totally inverted, as you can see, it's just at an angle. Gives a little bit more control. Okay, and I'll flick it over and I'll do the other side. Well, there's the proof that it works. Like a drum. 2 coats. I'm not sure whether it's the heat issue or whether it's this particular blend of polyester fabric. I suspect it's too much heat. But there it goes, it works. And what I'm about to start, well, I've started actually, is doing the elevator. We'll crack on and I'll show you the final assembly when it's all done. I think you can see here I've got a bit of a production line going. So iron the covering on, paint a thin down solution of the Mod Podge around the outside to stiffen up the fabric and to stop fraying. Works really well. As I think I've already mentioned, I used this for the first time when I was doing a silk scarf for a model pilot, and every time I cut it, obviously it frayed really badly, and I thought I'll use this. And then of course I've seen other people have recommended doing this. Just goes to show that there's very little in the modelling world, and for that matter the world in general now, where somebody somewhere hasn't already tried it. And that's the beauty of the internet, I suppose. It's got lots of problems and issues and so on, but one of the benefits is certainly that you can learn from other people's experience from all around the world. It's your ultimate membership of a club, I suppose, whatever your hobby or interest might be. Put that on one side now. So I've done the same here. This is now dried, and that means I can trim this without fear of it fraying on me, and that makes for a much neater finish, as I hope I can demonstrate here. So zero fray. I mean, these scissors are okay, but they're by no means top of the range. And I find obviously the better quality the scissors, the better the cut. But this little wheeze gets you around a lot of problems. I'm leaving an overlap here, just enough to get me around and a little bit on the underside of this elevator. There's a taper here, so I'm leaving a little bit more material on. Sharp blade is a handy tool to have at your disposal. And when you're going round a curve like this, it's sometimes advantageous to make some little relief cuts. Although I do find that I can get away with this rather well. Okay, back to the problem of this material sagging. As I think you can see, that's not the case, at least with this application, and it hasn't been with any of them that I have, but I'm very conscious that one or two people who've tried this have said that once they've applied the dope, it just hasn't worked and it's become slack. Now, that's sort of concerning to me, because I don't want to promote something and then find that people can't do it. And I did suspect that it might be an issue with the heat, but the chap who was making a model using this technique has reported that he's lowered the heat and the same problem applies. So it's a case of elimination. We think perhaps the dope's the issue now. So he's purchasing some of this stuff, exactly the same as I'm using. And that's what you've got to do when you're trying something out like this. The only way to work out what's going on sometimes is to experiment. And if you look back at some of my older videos, you'll find that I didn't jump straight in and cover an airframe with this material. I went out and bought a couple of meters and made a mock-up frame. An old damaged wing would be perfect, in fact, but I made a frame up and I tried different adhesives and I tried different temperatures and different techniques of application, and I found out what worked. And if you're trying anything like this, it's not good practice to sort of jump in and put it on that model that you've just spent 6 months building or longer without testing it first. The real world application would never attempt to do something like that, so our models are just as important to us, so why would you risk it? Always test first before you try. You know, don't go out and buy 6 meters of this stuff and start applying it to your Sopwith Camel 1/4 scale biplane without trying it out, is what I'm saying, in a clumsy sort of way. And once I've done this, I seal all the way around with some dope. That's just a belt and braces approach from me, because what I don't want it to happen is, as I shrink this, I don't want it to start pulling away and becoming slack. I think that could be an issue as well. If the dope pulls away and it's not secure at the joints, so this overlap isn't secure, if the material shrinks, well then it'll pull off. So what I always do before I shrink is I go around the overlap and make sure that it's secured with some dope. Now this is thinned down dope, and what I'm going to do is swap to full strength dope. For that reason, that I want it, this is a non-shrinking full strength dope. I don't think it particularly matters whether it's shrinking or not. But I want this edge sealed before I apply any heat at all to the material, because as I say, I don't want it pulling off. When somebody's saying they're trying something, it's not working, it's very difficult unless you can actually watch them doing it to see if they're doing anything differently that might be causing the issue. I mean, that's why I do these videos, so that people can see what I'm doing. And if it doesn't work, all I'm doing there, by the way, is just pressing it on to make sure that we have a good seal. Yeah, the reason I do these is, you know, I enjoy doing them. But also I like the idea of sharing my experience, and hopefully people can gain from it. I've learned a great deal from other people, and I would like to sort of pass it forward if I can. These are not new techniques. I'm not some genius that's thought of a unique way of doing something. But perhaps what I have done is I've taken a bit of time to rediscover something that the old hands who are no longer with us or no longer modelling couldn't share beyond their club mates. And we now have the internet, and it's possible to share ideas over a much larger area, which is what we're after. It's about promoting the hobby, isn't it? I don't know about you chaps, but I'm 63, 64, and that's about the average age of members in the club. And unless we do something about that, this is going to be a hobby of the past, because how are you going to rent fields or hire fields to fly in with 5 or 6 old fogies? It's not going to happen, is it? And I think it's important that we do everything we can to promote the hobby. And here's where I'm going to probably say something that perhaps is a little bit controversial. I think foamies have saved the hobby, because in the modern era, I don't know how many people have got the time or patience to do this. Obviously, if you're watching this, you're one of them, probably. But I think the club I belong to is quite exceptional in that we have quite a few builders. And that's not the norm. I know that Cliff Harvey said in his club, there's a handful of balsa bashers. The majority have ready-to-fly models. But we need those ready-to-fly enthusiasts. And perhaps, if they wish to, they might see a model and say, oh, I would like that. How do you go about getting that? And then you start explaining about the modelling side of making side of things. And that way we get more punters. but we certainly won't get them by looking down our noses at them or saying that, you know, that's not a proper model because you haven't spent months making it. I think that's a bad blind alley way to go down, and it's not one that I want to support. It's about drawing people into the hobby, not being a gatekeeper and forcing them out by looking down at them. Anyway, that's just my rant. Right, just got a little bit of fabric to put on here, which I'll do, and then that's ready for shrinking. In fact, I can shrink this to demonstrate. I just use the iron most of the time. I don't have to resort to using a heat gun. That's perfectly adequate. Just draw it over the surface, shrink it tight. And there's a little bit of a wrinkle there, and I'll show you how little I use the heat gun. There we go. Happy with that. So, heat gun. I'll pause it while I plug it in, and then I'll show you how I'll take out those final little wrinkled parts of this covering. Here we go then. And what I do when I'm doing this is I tilt the light so I can see where the crease or the wrinkle is that I want to remove. Job's a good one. There we go, and if I put it with the tail surface, that's been doped. No sagging in that, so perhaps it's the dope. I don't think it is, you know, that this chap's having problems with. I wonder if it's pulling away on the seal that it hasn't been sealed. I don't know, I'll have to ask him. There we go. I'll finish this off, and then the final cut of this little section will be looking at the whole of the tail feathers together. And here we have it. This is the tail feathers completed. Other than they need rib stitching added, as it was the case in the Fokker Day 7. It will need some pinked cover tape rather than the straight torn off strips that was used in the First World War. However, that's the next phase. This is how I like to approach covering. I try to avoid doing it all in one go. It's quite time consuming, any covering, whether it's film or this method. And I think if you do it too long in one go, it tends to be rather monotonous and you start making mistakes. So tail feathers done. I'll probably do one set of wings or the fuselage next, and break it down like that, and then switch to other modelling activities, and I find that much more productive. But you can see it's rather fetching and very drum tight. I'm really perplexed as to the cause of the problems some people have been experiencing with this. because the proof's there. This works. It's very effective, and I think it'll look great on this Tony Ray Tiger Moth. If you look in the community section on the YouTube channel, you'll see that I've been mulling over possible colour schemes. I have thought about a camouflage and asked for advice and put a civilian scheme on, which was plain yellow. And that, to my surprise, got the most votes from the punter, so to speak. A couple of people commented that they thought that the camouflage was over fussy, and at least in this scale tended to hide the fine lines of Tony Ray's build, design, which I fully get. But the thought of a plain yellow biplane just doesn't really appeal. And then somebody came up with a suggestion. They said they'd seen a Tigger that was in cream and red. Now that really appealed, and I put a second quiz up or vote up for people to decide what they thought, and unanimously people want to see a yellow and cream. Now I don't model just to please other people, but I'm certainly going to follow that route, and this Tiger Moth will be cream and red, and I think it'll look stunning in that livery. So there we go. Tail feathers done, drum tight, dress lining, 100% polyester. I'm off to buy some more from the shops in an hour or so for another project I have down the line. If you've enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't done so. Many people log on and don't subscribe. It costs you nothing, so why not? And why not get creative, folks, and get some building done while the weather doesn't play ball. Bye for now.